Alright, so today we're going to build this transitioned carousel. So when we click next, you can see that the images are transitioning from the right and the current image is transitioning to the left. And the same thing will happen in reverse if we go previously. It's actually keyboard accessible too, so we can use our keys, so you learn how to do that. And I'm going to have this very soft introduction into SASS. The main things we're really going to be using is nesting, and we're just going to look at how this end symbol can help us whilst using BEM, which is a methodology that helps you to create reusable components, blah, blah, blah. Basically, it's a way of, it's a class naming convention for your HTML in a way that's kind of friendly for reusable things and in a way that works really well with SASS. And finally, of course, we're going to have to cover quite a bit of JavaScript, which I'm hoping will be using the best practices, and it's going to have a lot of well-named functions, and it's going to be very readable code. Now, when I say readable code, I don't mean it's easy to understand for anyone. If you struggle with it, that's okay. All you have to do when you struggle with something in JavaScript is take it line by line. You can literally console log something line by line and you'll figure it out, at some point. It's all about connecting dots, but you have to really spend time just building something to connect the dots to. Without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so to start with our HTML file, we are going to have a final output of main.css. Yeah. We're going to have a script, single script file, just script.js. Just gave it a title, transitioned carousel, and we can start by adding some HTML now. So inside of our body, we can just add the carousel. It's going to be a div with a class of carousel. Okay. Next, we're going to add the two buttons for the previous and next images. So we're going to give the first button a class of carousel __ button. This follows the BEM methodology where carousel, this div, is our block, BEM for block. So B in BEM is for block. Then we have this __, this is the element, so block element. And because this is one of two buttons, which will have somewhat specific styling, we can add a modifier. So now we have a block, element, modifier. And SASS works really well with BEM, and you'll see why. And we can also add a data attribute. We're going to call it direction, and we're just going to give it previous. Yeah. And I'm just going to give a very basic emoji for next. And the same really with the next button. It's a carousel button. This time it's next, data, direction, next. And of course the other direction. Now we want to add is 3 images, and we can use the Unsplash API for this. So let's add an image with a class of carousel image. So again, we've got our block and we've got our element. Then in our source, we can add the HTTPS source.unsplash.com random, and then we can specify a width and a height. In this case, I'm following the 16:9 ratio. And you can run a query with a question mark afterwards, and I'm just gonna set this image to waterfall. It's gonna have an empty alt. And then again, carousel image. This time I'm gonna add a class of hidden, because initially I just want to show one image, right? When nothing has happened yet, when we load in our page, we just want one image. So we're gonna have a hidden class later on. And then of course our source with, so the same really image, except I'm gonna have a coral image instead of waterfall. And the last image, same thing, it's also hidden, and this time it's gonna be a mountain. And let's see, if we save it, okay, that seems to be fine. So now we can move on to SCSS. Okay, we're gonna start by adding some body styling, right? So we're gonna select our body, and I'm just gonna zoom in once. Our width will be 100%, minimum height will be 100 view height, background will be this dark gray color. Padding and margin will be set to 0, so I'm just resetting stuff now. It's going to have a display of grid. Place center. This simply places, if you have just one child in your grid, it's going to place it perfectly in the center, vertically and horizontally. And then I want to set box sizing to border box for pretty much anything in our entire document, just so it's a bit more simple to work with in case I need it. Then I'm going to send font size to 62.5% for the entire HTML file. By the way, this root could be HTML. I'm not sure why I wrote it like this. The specificity they both have is more or less towards the same thing. I just wrote it differently. I apologize. Okay, and just to check that our main.scss is working, let's actually turn SASS on. So assuming you have installed SASS, so if you haven't installed SASS, just go to Google, install SASS, and you're either going to npm install, or you're going to have this option with brew, or homebrew, or whatever how it's called on macOS. Homebrew is just I believe it's just a package manager. It literally says it here. If you don't have it on Mac, just install it, and then installing things for Mac becomes much easier as well. Yeah, you can install SASS globally, however you want from this page. And then let's see, so we can type SASS, and by the way, to check if you have SASS installed, just type SASS, click enter. If you get all these options telling you all these things that you can do with SASS, that means you have it installed. Let's clear it. In this case, I just want to watch a specific SCSS file, right? So I'm going to watch some SASS. And because we are in a root directory, right? In this case, I've got this without dials. Don't worry about what that means, but without dials. And okay, so let's see. We're going to go to styles, which is my styles folder. Then I want to select my main.scss. Main.scss. Now with a colon, no spacing or anything, just a colon now, we can tell SASS that where to output this SCSS code that it's watching. In this case, we're going to go to styles again. We're just going to call it main.css. And let me just click enter. Okay, compiled, blah, 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 blah. Let's have a look what it has compiled. And then I click save. Voila. So we should have that dark gray background, as you can see up there, and all that good stuff. Okay. So now, I'm just gonna remove my console. Let's just carry on. So now I want to select my carousel. So now I'm selecting this block. Yeah. And because I have it selected, I can select its children as well now quite easily, because SASS allows me to nest things. Yeah. So in this case, I want to select the element dash image, and can you see the syntax that I'm writing with? Yeah, dot carousel, and then inside of it, yeah, it's nested. I use the end symbol, underscore image. Let me just do it 100%. Let me save that, and look what the SASS has done. So we had this selector initially, because we wrote end like so, yeah, it actually just created the same class for us and then added whatever we put afterwards to it. So this is why BEM is really nice to use with SASS, yeah, because now if I just expand this a bit, you can see that I've added this carousel thing everywhere, and then I've got this underscore going on, and I can really easily select my blocks and stuff like that. Let's just carry on. I just want to clean up my images for now. So I've added my hidden class, and I've just set width to be 100%, just so they're not spamming my entire display. But now we can, let me just put my index. Actually, let's put index on the left, main here, just in case I need to actually look at it. Okay, now we can actually carry on with styling the carousel itself, yeah? I'm going to set width and max width for now. Okay, so it's going to be 90% until it reaches 70 rem, then it's going to stop growing, yeah? Display is going to be grid, and here I'm setting a few things with one single shorthand. Yeah, the grid is a shorthand. If we can read grid template rows, columns, and areas, which is pretty much all I use really. So this is my area, this is my row, this is my column. Yeah, align item center, perfect. Overflow-x will be hidden. This will come in handy later on. I'll show you exactly why we have this overflow-x hidden. And then I want to select every single direct child inside of my carousel. And I'm going to give it the grid area of all. Let's just save this and see what happens. Everything is actually now perfectly positioned here. And if I just hover over things, you can see that both buttons are perfectly centered, as well as all the images, basically. And now, speaking of buttons, let's give them some styling. So width and height will be set to max content, just whatever you need to be, just be that, yeah? Let index 5, just so they're on top. And both buttons are currently in the same position, and that's fine, we'll change that in a moment. And just keep in mind, whoops, something. Keep in mind that I'm just using this syntax throughout, yeah? Just understand that BEM is really good to use with SASS purely because of this, okay? We're gonna add some padding, some background for them. Let's see how this looks like. Okay, we can remove now the outline and the borders, I think, yeah? And now it's looking better. We're gonna transition the transform, because when we hover, we want something to happen with transform. Cursor pointer, let's see how this looks like. Cool, we've got a proper button now. When we hover, we want to transform and scale 1.1. Nice. So it's just scaling, just so we know we're actually hovering over it. And now, to my button, I can also have one more thing. So I'm inside of carousel, then inside of button, and now I'm adding this end dash previous. So this is actually to create this selector, carousel button previous. Previous, we just want to justify self to the start. Justify self is the horizontal axis within CSS grid. And then for our next, you might have guessed, justify self will be end. So let's see how this looks like. Nice. So we've got our previous button and our next button positioned properly. And now the last thing we want to create is some keyframes, because what we're going to be doing, and you could, I suppose, transition this with JavaScript. I decided to use keyframes or CSS animations just to kind of play around, because I always use transitions in my videos, and I figured let's use an animation, just maybe introduce someone to them or something. In coding, there's always multiple ways of doing something, so I suppose that's why I'm trying to approach it like that. Okay, so we created an animation called animate from left. So animate from left will be from transform translate x minus 100%. So you can kind of assume that this will be for the images. So imagine this image, yeah, was all the way like 100% to its left of its own width. So it would literally start somewhere from like here, yeah? And then what we wanted to happen is come from here into here. So for that, quite simply, from and to. Transform, translate 0. That's it. Then it puts it in its natural place. The nice thing with using transform, translate, in this case translate x, is that you can position and move stuff in your page, your app, without breaking anything. Like, it's not going to push our content around. It's more like a decorative movement of your thing. It's kind of similar to how things behave when you have position absolute. It doesn't impact anything else on the page, just itself. And then we're going to create a few other animations, because we're going to need to animate from left and animate from right. So some images will be animating from left or from right, depending on which button we click on. But we're also going to animate the current image. So whatever this image is either going to go to the right or to the left. So animate to left. So from 0, its normal position, to left, minus 100%. And to right is just the same thing, just 100%. All right, let's just save this. And that's our SCSS or CSS done. And let's just kind of review how everything kind of looks like in our code. Yeah, I'm just gonna spread it out just so you can see, and maybe if you're confused, I don't know if I have an error somewhere. I should have saved a bunch of stuff by now. Don't save. Ah, okay, that's my mistake because I wrote something, I forgot. Okay, so let's see, carousel, let's look at the button one. Yeah, carousel, that's just button. So it literally just added this underscore button. All the code is the same. And then because within that selector button, we added and hover, it basically creates this for us. Oops. And so on and so forth with the previous and the next. Yeah. So you can see it's really nice using BEM like this. But yeah, I think we're done with our CSS now. Let's move on to the JavaScript bit now. So to start off our JavaScript bit, after we've done our CSS, we need to grab some elements. I'm going to zoom in one more time for now. We need to grab some elements. So the first thing we want to grab is our previous button. So we're going to have document query selector button. So we've got our block essentially. Then we're going to select our element, which is button within our carousel. And then we're going to select that previous. Yeah. And then we want to grab a next button. It's the same thing, except it ends with next, as you might have guessed. And then we're going to grab our images. So all these carousel image ones. Yeah. Images. So we want to actually create an array from this. So we can do document query selector all this time. Image, carousel image. And this will grab all our images here as a node list. And because we have it within the spread syntax, it's actually going to create an array for us. And then we want to set some initial values. You can think of these as global values. They will be global. And they're kind of like a controller. It's kind of like controlling a state, the state of this particular carousel. Yeah. Initially, we're going to have this position of 0. And if you imagine these images, this array of images, right, that is basically links, creates this direct link to every single image within our HTML. So if we, let's say, target images index 0, we're going to grab this, right? We can manipulate this particular element. So because we know whenever we refresh the page or whatever, that images, that the first image doesn't have this class of hidden, so it is shown effectively. We know that the position is 0, yeah, because it's the first image. So technically, we know through this relationship that images 0 or images position initially, so position will be our index, so to speak. We just know that these things will match, yeah. So we will be updating this throughout. And it's basically kind of like a state, in this case, a position state, or where we are, what image we want to grab or manipulate. And then we're going to have duration of 500. So this is just so we can change the animation durations whenever we want. Yeah, we're going to set them through our JavaScript. And in this case, we're going to use 500 milliseconds. This is capitalized because the value is set in stone. It's a true constant. It's also global. And I believe this is the best practice from C# or maybe just programming in general. I'm not sure. And then we're going to have animating. So whenever we click on our previous or next button, we're going to start animating something. And I don't want us to be able to spam between these animations. I'm going to set this animating initially is false. When we start animating, this is going to turn true. And then when it finishes animating, it's going to turn back to false. But whilst it's true, nothing else will basically happen. So we could spam the next button, but it's not going to spam the images to the next. It's going to do nothing until animating is false. Then if you click, it's going to work. And you'll see what that means in a moment. And yes, this will be updated, of course. And the next thing would be, I suppose, to start adding some event listeners. So the next step will be to add some event listeners, basically. So we want to add event listeners to these two buttons, button.next and button.previous. Basically, we're going to control wherever we want to go to the previous or next image with them. So first thing we can always listen for is window add event listener. Is DOM content loaded? Is all our HTML loaded? If it's loaded, this event will be fired. And this event will be basically a self-running arrow function. So it takes in a function, as you can see. Most JavaScript things, so let's say add event listener is like a function. This is one argument in the function, and the second argument is a callback, right? And in this case, we're just going to run some code whenever this happens, yeah? And we want to add events for direction buttons. So we're going to select our previous button, add event listener of click, and we want to run handle direction button. And the same thing we're actually going to do for button next. We can run the same function because thankfully we have saved this data attribute with the attribute with the name of direction and the value of previous and the value of next. So we don't actually need different functions at this stage, yeah? And let's create this function, handle direction button. It will be an arrow function, and we can pass through, whenever you fire off an event in JavaScript, you can actually use the event object that is given for you. So what did you click on? Where was it on the screen, etc. It gives you lots and lots of information. And we can just pass it through as E or event, however you want, yeah? And then, so const button is E.target. This would probably already return as the button, but just to be sure, you can always add .closest and button. What .closest does is, imagine you have a button in your HTML, yeah? And then inside of the button, instead of just text straight away, imagine you have a paragraph. So then it's possible for you to click on that paragraph instead of the button. And sometimes this happens, I'm not really sure why. But then to avoid that, you can add closest. And what closest will do is it's going to look for the closest button whilst traversing up the DOM hierarchy. So you know how in HTML you've got this kind of tree thing opening up. So that's why we can close this stuff. Yeah, just like that. So if this was a paragraph, it would, instead of being here, it would traverse to this level. And if this would be a button, it would stop there. So just have a read of what closest does, but it just goes up the DOM. Yeah. In this case, you can actually add like a full stop and proper CSS class into here. And then we have a direction button dataset direction, and that will grab as the previous and .next. And let's see why that would be the case. Button.dataset.direction. So whatever the button is, when we click on it, we're accessing with dataset, we're accessing the dataset attribute, and we're looking for the direction attribute. And if it finds it, it's going to return the value that we stored, right? So that's what we're doing here. And then we can, I suppose, do something with this. What do we want to do? So we're handling this direction button. We clicked on it, we're handling it. What do we want to happen next? We want to transition the images. So let's just create this function now. And I'm going to slow down with the reverse engineering this thing. Transition images direction. So we can create transition images. It's going to be an arrow function. I'm going to pass through the direction. And then there's a few steps we have to do. So if we're already animating, we want to cancel this function. So we can't spam it. Yeah, that's going to be the first step. Then we want to set up the data. So you remember this position, yeah? We want basically the current position where we are. So in this case, we are actually at 0, just like it shows here. And we'll get the next position or the next new image position. So that will be different depending on whether we click previous or next, right? And then we just want some functionality to happen because we have our positions, we've got the images, we've selected what we needed. Now we want the functionality to happen. And okay, so let's see. So the first step would be really simple, right? And basically, I'm going to type it here. If we're animating, let's return. So this function will not run if animating is set to true. Yeah. And I've used let for that reason. I want to update this, right? And then we want to grab our data. So to grab our data, I kind of want to create two functions. Okay. And let's see how this might look like. So if I create a const and assume I'm going to create a function that will return us some data, right? In this case, I want to return the current position where we are. Yeah, what is the current image position, or position in this case you can think of as index. I'm calling it position. And new position. What is a new position? Okay. And you can see I'm using these curly brackets. So that means that I'm going to use object destructuring already. If you're not familiar with that, you'll kind of see what that's all about. And then I want to get this from a function effectively. The function will be called getPositions, and we're going to pass through a direction of it, through it, yeah? So let's actually create it. I'm going to create an arrow function called getPositions. We're going to pass through the direction, just like we have it below. And then const current position will always be easy because it's just position. The reason why I'm even doing that is just for my own sanity, just when I'm keeping track within the function. I could just refer back to position, but I want something more local, if that makes sense. You don't have to do this. Instead of returning this, you can just use the global one for position, yeah? So whatever you're more comfortable with, really. And the new position will be a bit more complicated because it will be dependent upon the direction. So let's see, let new position. And for now, let's just leave it empty. Yeah, it's just an empty variable. Okay, the direction, if you remember, it's either going to be if direction is equal to next, or if actually no, that's it, right? The other direction will be previous. Okay, so what is going on now? If our direction is next, what do we want to happen, right? So we want to set the new position to be something. Okay, what do we want to be set to? Well, if we're at position 0 and we click next, logically we kind of want to be position +1. Okay, cool. So we could leave it at that, and that would work for a while until we run out of images, right? We can't infinitely add you know, a position, because at some point we're going to be at position 2, which is our last image of 3 images in our array. So we kind of need this controller to take us back to the beginning. So if we clicked on, if we're on our last position, we click next, and there's nothing else after, like we have to go back to the first one. Yeah, it's a carousel. It spins around. So let's not do this initially. Let's see. If our position is equal to images.length, so this will equal to 3, right? Take away 1. This kind of gives us the last index that our images can be. If it's equal to basically the last image, question mark, is it equal to that? If it's equal to that, we just want to set this to 0, right? Because we want to go from the last image to the first image, and index 0 is the first image. Otherwise, we just want position +1, because otherwise, if we're not on the last one, we do just want to move 1 forward. Okay, so that's our new position there. Otherwise, and let me just write it, if direction is previous, it's just so we can actually read stuff in English a bit easier, yeah? And let me just expand this a bit, just so we can read that on one. Okay. Otherwise, new position. So now we kind of have to think in reverse. If we're on the first image, right? If we're on the first image, so if position is the first image, question mark, then the new position for the previous image has to be the last one. So thankfully we already have the code here. This is the last one, right? So if we're on images 0, we want to go to images 2 effectively, which this will equal to. Otherwise, we just want to take, whoops, we just want to go position -1. Okay. And now this should work, and we're going to test if it works, yeah? Return, we're going to return an object with current position and with new position. Whoops. New one. Position. Okay. So we have a function that gets our positions, and you can see how the function name as well kind of matters, yeah? Get positions, it literally gets our positions. Returns this current position and this new position. And because it returns an object, we can do object destructuring. Yeah. So instead of writing, you know, const current position equals, you know, get positions, direction, and then because it returns an object, we can do current position. You can see how that's longer and just more convoluted, right? It just creates a mess. We can do this object destructuring, and it's much nicer, I think, if you'll agree. And then we want to grab our images. Actually, before that, let's just console log this, right? Console log, and let's just console log this as an object just to see what we get. Okay, we're at position 0. We're going to click next. I'm assuming that our current position will be 0 and our new position will be 1. Yes, it is. There. Yeah. So hopefully you can see that. Current position 0, new position 1. And if I click previous, current position will still be 0, of course, but the new position will be 2. Nice, because we have 3 images, I can do this much. That makes no sense. Just slow it down, console log every single line, you know, if you're making something like this, and slowly just try building understanding. In the end, learning this stuff is all about creating these mental maps of how stuff works. And as you learn one line or one function at a time, it's going to start connecting all these dots in you. That's quite literally how anything is learned, right? We know that this is working so far. So let's assume it works perfectly. And now let's get our images. So we want to do something similar. Okay, I already have the code next to me, so I'm going to paste it here. So I want to grab my current image and new image. So I'm going to use my current position, new position, and create this function called get images. So let's do that. Get images. Okay. So let's copy these across. So const current image equals images current position. Easy, right? Just gonna access the whatever image I am at. And because I have a function that's already doing my thinking for me to get the new position, whether we click previous or next, we don't have to worry about it because we can just basically new image and new image, new position. And all we have to do then is the same thing, just return it. Current image and new image. Oops, apologies. A new image. That's all we're going to return. That's a function of get images. And of course, we can just console log this just to see if we're doing the right thing. Again, let's see. So we know that our second image is hidden, the first image isn't hidden. Pretty much the same the other direction. Nothing drastically new. I'm gonna assume it's working perfectly. I'm gonna move on because this is actually all our data set up now for us. Yeah. And now we can create another little tiny single line function, arrow function. We don't even need these. A single one of these. Const. We're gonna call it set animating to, or Yeah, set animating to true. I like it. It's kind of like a verb. It's an action, right? We don't actually need it to pass any arguments inside. Animating equals true. That's our entire function. So because we want to start animating soon, I just want to set it to true. And if you remember, I'm using this kind of as a controller against spam. Because if it's animating, I don't want to run this function. Yeah. So we're going to set animating to true. And then we want to run animations. Okay. So run animations will have to take a few things. We need to animate on a few images. Let's copy our images inside. And we need to know which direction are we heading in, because that's going to impact the animations that we created. You know, move from left, move to left, from right, move from right. Okay. So we want to also pass through the direction. Let's create this function now. Yeah. Okay. So arrow function, we're going to create run animations. We can literally just copy these across. Okay. Let's have a thing. So what we want to do is we want to check if direction is next, and else we know it's previous. If the direction is next, because we click this, we want the current image to go left, yeah, and the new image to come from right. So let's see how we might do this. The current image, we want to move it to the left. So we're going to go to style.animation equals, now I'm going to use backticks and animate to left. And if you recall, we have our CSS file and we have a animate from left. Now our animation currently doesn't have a set duration. Let's add that duration. Okay, this is, I'm not sure actually how to call this within backticks, but you can use this backticks and then you can use this syntax to add a variable. In this case, the variable we're adding is a duration. I'm just zoom out. I'm not gonna zoom out. Instead, I'm gonna make this bigger. I'm gonna make this smaller. I'm gonna move this to the bottom. There we go. That's actually perfect for this project. Duration, because the duration is only a number, 500 if you recall, I'm gonna add ms, so it's gonna be just 500 milliseconds. Then I'm gonna write forwards. What forwards does in animations is, what usually happens is, let's say you want to move something to the right, it moves to the right, and then it returns back. Yeah, because the animation happened, it returns where it is. Forward stops that behavior. So whatever the animation ends at, so if you moved something 100% to the right, it's going to stay there. So it's no longer going to move there anywhere else. So forwards, that's what it does, yeah? The current image, animate to left, and new image, we want to animate from right. Okay, and cool. And then, to be honest, we should probably run this and check like what's going on. So I'm gonna just set position equals new position. So I'm updating the global variable now, position. And because I'm finishing and animating is set to false. We're gonna write these as their own functions in a moment, just so it looks a bit cleaner, yeah? So right now we've created this next one. So let's save everything. And let's see, next. What could I have done wrong? I know what I did wrong. So new image, whatever the new image is, initially we can assume that it's hidden. Remember that class of hidden? That the image is here, it's just not shown, right? Visibility is hidden. Class list, remove hidden. Save that. Okay, it restarted. Next. Nice. So, and okay, right now it's actually spammable. And the reason for that, I'm not actually sure right now, to be honest. I know why. animating false actually needs a timeout. So we need a load timer, basically. Yeah. Animating will be set to false after duration +1. So after 501 milliseconds, we want to run this code, or rather this function after this time. The timeout. Okay, so now we shouldn't be able to spam it. Yeah, well, I can't spam. I'm spamming my mouse right now. Perfect. So we know the next works. So assuming the logic is more or less the same for previous, all we have to do is, if we're clicking on previous, we want the current image to move right. So move to right. And we want the new image to animate. Let's save that. Let's see how this works. Okay. Nice. So you can see they're the same images. They're moving kind of this natural flow. Very nice. All we have to do is clean up our code now effectively. So position equals new position. Okay, that should be an easy one. Arrow function, update position, new position. We don't even need the multiple lines here. Position equals new position. Okay, that's nice. And we can just replace that. Let me just copy that. Okay, and let me just remove that. A new position is from here, if you remember, yeah? We already calculated that. Okay. And set timeout. And by the way, you want to update the position after you run all this stuff, right? Because you don't want anything to be messed up through changing the position. It shouldn't, because we haven't written the code that way, but you should think about the order of things. That's all I'm saying. And then const will be reset animating. Let's just do a to false, and that's okay. Long name like that. I should have just used my shortcut there for arrow functions. And animating equals, actually we can't do that. Need a proper arrow function because we have the set timeout. Okay, we can just pass it here. Let's format all our code. Add some spacing, remove that spacing. And honestly, this works already. Yeah, it's very readable code. We are grabbing our positions, we're grabbing our images, we're setting animating to true. This is our controller. We are running the animations, and then it's going to depend on this direction. Then it's going to set the different animation code, and I can actually show you that in my inspect. Have a look right now. It has this set animation. Yeah. See that? And it's actually setting a bunch of things that are default, so you don't have to worry too much about them. It's pretty much going to work as expected for you. Okay. The one more thing that we can add is, what if we want to add a keyboard listener? Let's say we want to make this keyboard accessible. A window, add event listener, key down. So whenever someone presses key down, we want to handle key down. Let's handle key down. Okay. And now let me use my thingy, handle key down, pass string. And if you remember, every event listener creates an event object for us. Yeah, so I can do const key equals e.key. Actually, I'll actually show you this really quickly. E. Okay, let's see what's going on. Not that. Console. Okay, I'm gonna click my keyboard event. Look at that. Key is one of the first ones. Key is arrow right. So that's actually what I was gonna check for. Okay. And you have lots of other stuff. The key code. So you have codes for your keys. Lots of stuff, really. Lots of information available. Yeah. Let's remove the console log. If key equals arrow right, what do you want to happen? Well, actually, we already have all the code for what we want to happen. We have a button next, and the right arrow is there. So button next dot click. We can just click the button with our JavaScript, and it's gonna do kind of what you'd expect it to do now. Yeah, and we can just keep this in the same line, just so it's a bit more readable. And then if the arrow is left, the button previous. We click left, therefore going backwards, therefore button previous. Let's see if that works. I'm going to use my keyboard. Yep. So I'm going back now. Now I'm going forwards now. Very nice. So that seems to be working fine as well. For this default behavior, this is basically finished. You can hopefully see how I tried naming things and just trying to break stuff down into these individual steps. I could have done more steps, but I think for the purpose of a carousel, this is very readable code. Maybe not to someone completely new, and that's okay. I was hella confused with every single line of JavaScript initially. It looked very daunting. But JavaScript ultimately, you saw how I did this. It was line by line. So hopefully you took something out of this. Here we are. It occurred to me that I didn't actually end up explaining why I used overflow X is hidden. So I think I had that in my body or carousel. Carousel has overflow X hidden. This is why. Okay, because we're actually just moving these images, you know, however we need to move them, basically. And without overflow X, of course, you know, everything will be showing. So we just want whatever is inside of this carousel container here to be shown. Otherwise, we want to hide it. That's it. I hope that makes sense. Yeah.